Alrighty. Alrighty. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. How you guys doing? Alhamdulillah. So I figured even if I don't get a lot of people or nobody at all, I will still gonna react to this plugin theology. It's a good yeah. I think it's a good video. It's gonna be a good video. So yeah, I'll be check it out. Let's see. Let's see. All right. Well, you know what? Oh, Rune, walaikum salam. How are you doing today? Yes, great. Yes. So a video from blogging theology. Yeah, I think it's gonna be a good video. Um, it's always got one of the greatest interviewers. It's got some great people there. So, oh really? He's actually, I think he was voted the most influential Muslim on YouTube. So, yeah. Thank you for sending us your love. Alhamdulillah. So, thank you so much. Yeah, he is. He's actually a Muslim. He's well versed. He actually studied. He was Christian first. Studied a lot of Christianity, and like me and others, deconstructed his own religion and saw that there was problems on there, and then started learning about Islam. Became a Muslim, and you know, he's a very well learned person. He's because he's been in the scholar realm for so long. He gets a lot of in contact with a lot of people who are also scholars. So, oh no, he is credible. Just period. Because of his studies, his credentials, everything. He's just credible. So he's also known by just about all the dais as well. So yeah, I think he was only once in Hamza's little thing on there, like his like gladiator thing where to debate, but he's never been part of a debater. He doesn't like debates on it. He just likes to have the one-on-one conversations, see where he goes. But yeah, no, this guy is he's very good. So yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and start a video, and inshallah you guys will enjoy it. Let's go.
And welcome to Blogging Theology. And today I'm delighted to talk to Omar Hussein. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
It's good to have you on. Omar is a host on the Narrative House podcast, which I'll link to below, and is also a khatib and speaker. He has delivered numerous talks on Islamic and political issues for over 2 decades. And over the last 17 months in particular, he's spoken regularly about Palestine at universities, at masjid as well, and community events. He is originally Palestinian and the son of a Nakba survivor. When we think of the Nakba, we should remember it was made up of thousands of personal stories of over 750,000 Palestinians who were ethnically cleansed from their lands across Palestine. This is sort of something that's still going on as we speak today, unfortunately. Our guest's father was a 12-year-old at the time, and along with his family, they were forced out from their home and lands near Haifa. Omar will walk us through his family's passage through the Nakba and beyond to the current catastrophe afflicting the Palestinian people. So thank you very much for coming on today and sharing your extraordinary and very personal story, Omar.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Okay, let's put the, here we go.
So yes, assalamu alaikum, everyone. Before I start my presentation, I really want to dedicate this presentation and everything I'm really saying to the people of Gaza, because what they faced over the last 17 months is really something so horrific and atrocious that it's hard to put into words.
Mm-hmm.
And just yesterday, we lost two more journalists. As we know, Hussam and Muhammad, two young journalists killed in the path of getting the truth out to us across the world. So I just really want to dedicate this presentation to them and to all the people of Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And now in terms of my family story, it started in this village of Qanir, which is near Haifa. And as Paul mentioned, my father was a 12-year-old at the time. It was a very prosperous farming village. They lived off the fat of the land. You know, they had horses. They lived a very, very comfortable life. And obviously what was brewing in the background was the beginnings of the Nakba. This obviously started way before 1948. But I'll start the story from 1948 and explain what happened to them then. And then maybe we can go back in terms of what were the steps that led to the Nakba in the first place.
Thank you. Can I just add, to those who don't know, can we just define or explain this term Nakba? Because in the West, in Europe and the United States particularly, it's virtually unknown. If I walked out on the streets of London now and said, have you heard of the Holocaust? They go, oh yeah, Holocaust. Have you heard of the Nakba? The what? They're not going to know. And this itself is really significant that we're not aware in the West of what this term means, even though.
What's surprising is there's so many different ethnic cleansing and also like Holocaust events that nobody talks about. We only talk about one, about what happened to the Muslims in the East. Like the brother, he's got a good the Dean show. Like his family comes from an area where there was ethnic cleansing of Muslims there by like another radical Christian group. Nobody talks about. There's so much that's happened in that nobody talks about, but we only drew in our heads just one. Like it's only happened one time only, and that's with the Jewish people.
It is incredibly significant for Muslims and Arab Christians, Palestinians, and many people throughout the world. So, can you just very briefly just define what this unfamiliar means?
Yes, of course. So, in 1948, it's kind of commemorated around May. It's called the catastrophe, and essentially, it's when Palestinians were forced out of their lands across Palestine. And they were made either internally displaced refugees within the West Bank and Gaza, or they actually went outside of Palestine to Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and even beyond. So it's really, it marks that catastrophe really, where 750,000 Palestinians were forced out of their homes, ethnically cleansed from their lands.
The word Nakba itself is Arabic for catastrophe.
Catastrophe, yes.
It means catastrophe and refers to that series of events.
Yeah,
which is still going. Arguably, the Nakba never ended, and it's still continuing today.
Absolutely, you could argue.
Yeah. So after World War II, the U.S. said, "Oh, by the way, okay." Oh my God, the story about this is so atrocious. But I'm sure Christians will say it was the Holy Spirit leading them. So we don't know what happened in World War II. Because what happened was what they did was, the thing is there were Jews there too. See, when they were fleeing, Palestinian people brought them in and gave them, and opened up their homes to them because they knew what was happening. So all Muslims across the world were opening their doors and helping them. And then right after that, the U.S. was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, yeah, this land is yours now." And the same people that they helped and rescued on them, they literally kicked them out of their own homes. If they will stop, they murdered them. Same people that gave them refuge, they murdered them. And then there was this whole bringing people in. They're like, okay, and they were just take Just take whatever home you want. Homes that were already there. Just take whatever home you want. If there's people inside of them, kick them out. If they're forced, you shoot them, kill them, and then you move on. So yeah, that's what happened right after World War II. Yeah.
The Nakba taking place in Gaza is actually far worse in terms of the crimes being committed. So yes, that's right.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Sorry.
So yeah, as I mentioned, Qanir was a small village near Haifa, a very large city in Palestine. And my father, as a 12-year-old, remembers the stories very vividly. So one story that I think always kind of captures people's attention is, did Palestinians just leave Palestine without a fight, or did they attempt to stay on their lands? And Qanir in particular actually was one of those villages where they did put up a resistance. So my Uncle Hassan, he was the eldest of the brothers. He was nominated, along with the eldest of most families, the young men of most families, to mount a defense of Qanir. So my father remembers the night when the Haganah forces and the other terrorist Zionist gangs attempted to take Qanir. So they came in the middle of the night and attempted to take the village. But the young fighters were able to actually repel them that night. And the following morning, they actually went into the fields and they could see the blood of where those terrorists essentially had been shot. And they were able to defend their town on that night. However, what really happened in Qanir and other villages and towns across Palestine is that they realized that overwhelming equipment and military power of the Zionist gangs were too much for them to actually defend against. So my grandfather took the very difficult decision of leaving Qanir in 1948 and making his way to Jenin. And Jenin is a very well-known town in the West Bank. And it's actually come under a lot of press cover recently because of the fact that they're actually being attacked themselves now. And the Mukhayyam Jenin, or the refugee camp of Jenin, has been attacked, and people have been displaced even from that refugee camp. So Jenin has a very, very interesting story, and I'm hoping to elaborate on that in the following slides. But before I do that, and one thing that a lot of people ask me is, how was life in Palestine before the Nakba? How?
Look at that. And if you see this right here, it's a Jew. I think we both know what this is. You can see right here what it's called. Yeah, it was fine. It was fine. Also, so there were death squads, and there was actually Jews who also resisted this. And guess what they did? They also killed and displaced the Jews that didn't want to play along. The so-called the so-called children of God, whatever. Yeah, they killed their own as well, and Christians as well too.
How did Muslims, Christians, and Jews live amongst each other before the Nakba? And what's obviously very interesting is that there was a very large Christian population. So 14% of Palestine was actually Christian at the time of the Ottomans. So in 1917, when British forces took Palestine, 14% of the population were Christian. So a lot of people find that very surprising, because currently there's only a few percent who are Christian in Palestine. And Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived side by side. So my father has many stories of actually interacting with Jewish families when he was a young boy. So just one example of this is in the neighboring Jewish village, they used to go and see the local Jewish doctor. She was a lady doctor. And he vividly remembers going to see her. She was like the local family GP, you could say, in the local village. So it's just to show you how entrenched and how intertwined the lives were, Muslim, Jews, and Christians. And there wasn't that kind of animosity or hatred that we see now. And there was many other stories of Jewish people coming to their town and buying stock for their farms and other things like that. So it was a very natural life where people intermingled.
It's also, I mean, I don't know much about this, but it strikes me that the Palestinians, the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews all look quite similar in some ways ethnically. And many of the Zionists today we see, like heading up the government, they look like Europeans. They look as if they're from England or something. They look and dress very differently from these people in these photographs who looked indigenous to the area, who actually looked like Palestinians or Jews who've been there for centuries, perhaps.
That's correct. That's correct. There was the Jews and Christians had been there for literally centuries. So they spoke Arabic. It was that they saw themselves culturally very much like the indigenous Palestinian population. There was no real difference in that way. You may have heard stories where people would look after each other's babies during religious festivals. So, if it was a Jewish festival and they had very young children, they may take them to their Muslim neighbors and vice versa. So that's the extent to which life was very normal amongst people of different faiths during, the period before the Zionist occupation.
I mean, you don't even see that here in the U.S. Like, and it's funny because in if in Puerto Rico, that was common. We had this, that's all been gone, but we had this thing I remember where, so many people that used to call uncles, and they're just friends, family, and it was like that. It's like if my parents will take care of kids, or like, oh, somebody else will take care of kids. There's a hurricane, everything. It was like that. It's a beautiful thing when you have that bond, and it was never about who believed in what, nothing. It was just about we're from the same area. We saw each other just as Puerto Rican, just like them. They see themselves as Palestinians. So I understand that because I used to live that. But that's all gone all across the entire world.
Okay.
So the Nakba, as we mentioned, was 750,000 people that were displaced from their homes, forcibly displaced, ethnically cleansed, and about 15,000 people were killed. The numbers could be way higher, but this was what was reported at the time. We know villages and towns like Tantura, Deir Yassin, where there was mass casualties and executions. And my father's village, Kanir, they were able to escape that because they left before the Zionist gangs actually arrived to take over. So that was a decision that many families took. And that's why some people ask, why were so many Palestinians displaced before they were attacked? And that's because they saw what had happened in hundreds of villages across Palestine. So they took the decision to protect their families and young children.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
So they arrived at Jenin. And what's really interesting about Jenin is probably one of the most untold stories of the Nakba and of 1948. Is a man called Omar Ali Bayaktar. Yeah. So Omar Ali Bayaktar was the general of the Iraqi army that defended Jenin, and it was a stunning victory. Actually, they defeated the Haganah forces that attempted to take the city. And Jenin is a very important city because it's right at the beginning of the West Bank. So taking Jenin would have opened up the rest of the West Bank to occupation. So there were 44 Iraqi martyrs, and on the right-hand side of my screen, what you see there is the plaque of the 44 Iraqi soldiers who'd fallen in Jenin, the martyrs.
And the thing is, the Palestinians were a terrorist because they were stopping people from taking their homes. The U.S. was supplying weapons, obviously, and everything. They're like, oh, look at those terrorists who are not allowing what we asked them, what we told them that was going to happen. Yeah, it's a good movie. Kingdom of Heaven is so historically inaccurate. It's so Hollywood, but it's still a good story. So a good movie.
And they call it Maqbar al-Shuhada, the graveyard of the martyrs of Jenin. It was actually a Palestinian family who gave up the land for those martyrs to be buried on their land. And to this day, you will still see the Iraqi flag side by side with the Palestinian flag because people really recall and
that's why Iraq
value the sacrifice of the Iraqi army in defending Jenin. Now, what was very interesting is Omar Ali Bayaktar knew how weak the Zionist forces were, and he knew that they had been propped up all these years, and actually they were no match to the trained armies. So he actually asked for permission to take Haifa. So if you look at the map of Palestine, Haifa is on the coast. So if you take Palestine, you've literally cut Palestine into half. There is no really a viable Zionist state. So he asked for permission to move his forces to take Haifa. He was prevented from doing so. So it was the Iraqi defense minister at the time called Saleh Zaki, who actually forbade permission. He forbid him to actually move his forces in the direction of Haifa. And the Arab women, the Palestinian women, used to sing a folk song. They used to say, Saleh Zaki, Maku Amr, Maku Amr. What is wrong with you, Saleh Zaki? Why did you not give permission to fight? Because they realized that this would have been the chance to actually end this kind of illegal occupation right at the outset. So it's a really interesting story. So my dad lived there for about 2 to 3 years.
And you started this on, it was because of Western influence. One of the things why they, like Saddam and all this, the Western influence was actually huge on there. You know, they became puppets of it all. So we see it from there. That's why Saddam, or everything that's bad, I know he was not a great person on there. He hated Israel on it. And one of the things he spoke against was that, and so many other things about what Iraq could have done. You know, Iraq back that being the era where the Ottoman Empire rose, and that's what something he wanted to establish again.
Initially, they lived in a cave, would you believe it? And then they lived in the forest. They used to sell firewood. So going from a very prosperous, very comfortable life in Kanir, now as internally displaced refugees, selling herbs. And
he was an Arab nationalist / I won't say Muslim, but he knew why, like, the Sharia law was important. He knew why the faith was important. I think that's why he built so many mosques and so on. Like, he's at the end of his life, he became more of. He grew up Muslim. He became more of a Muslim, taking the Shahada right before they executed him. It's kind of like like he awakened to what's really was happening at the very end of his life. And right before they executed him, he took the Shahada. Yeah, because he knew he was I won't say he wasn't a practicing Muslim. Yeah, so but at the end, like he truly embraced the faith at the end. Like he knew everything was about to die, and kind of like realized kind of like, you know, what more could have been done and so on. So
and firewood to any of the local towns and villages around Jenin. And he mentioned something very interesting. He said, had it not been for the Iraqi army, their life would have been miserable because they had food with them. And he remembers taking my auntie, who at the time was a little baby, to the Iraqi army. And there was a Kurdish officer that he remembers who would give them like creams and treatments for some skin conditions that they had at the time. So it was definitely something that they look upon fondly in terms of what the Iraqi army did in terms of protecting Jenin, but also in terms of the servitude and the service that they offered to the refugees who lived in Jenin during that time. So moving on, they ended up in a refugee camp called Nur Shemes, which is right next to Tul Kerem, which is a kind of a major town in the West Bank. And Nur Shemes, and these are pictures that have just come out during this kind of last 17 months, has been under attack and is currently under occupation. So my family now have been forced out of their homes in Nur Shemes and now are living with family either in Tul Kerem or in the outskirts of Nur Shemes. But the camp itself now is under occupation. They've destroyed dozens of homes and they've killed dozens of people, including children and women, just in Nur Shemes. We're not talking about Gaza here. So Nur Shemes was actually a British prison during British Mandate Palestine. So when we used to visit Nur Shemes and we would look at the bars in the house, they used to be on the windows, and we used to ask, why is there bars in the house? You know, like prison bars. And the reason being is that it was actually a converted British prison. And many of those Palestinians who tried to resist British occupation and also tried to resist what they knew was going to be an inevitable Zionist occupation of Palestine would end up in prisons like this. So they remain there ever since. So Nur Shemes is now kind of the de facto home for us within the West Bank and Palestine, ever since the Nakba in 1948. So this is like possibly another 4 or 5 refugee camps have been destroyed in the same way in Jenin and in other places across the West Bank. But there's constant raids by the Israeli occupation forces in all the cities of the West Bank. So unlike the severity and the kind of the bombing that we see in Gaza, it's still a very horrific occupation that we witness in the West Bank, and has been like that since 1967, when the West Bank fell to the Zionist occupation. Moving on, this is a picture of my cousin, Rafat Hussein, who was the first martyr in the family.
Man, look at that afro.
There were 10 martyrs in the family now. He was the first to be killed in 1976.
Yeah,
and actually, the anniversary of his death is actually happening in the next few days. It was the 30th of March, 1976. It was called the Land Day. And this is when 6 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli occupation. And he was the first to be martyred in the family. His brother Faisal died soon after, fighting to defend Lebanon. And since that time, several more cousins and children of my cousins have been martyred in Palestine. And this is quite a common story amongst Palestinians. Very rarely will you find a Palestinian family who hasn't got martyrs within them, because naturally many of them resisted occupation. It's almost unheard of not to have a prisoner within the family. So there's dozens and dozens of Palestinian.
Something I've noticed in the Western press, the Western media, is that when we have Israeli hostages, we know what they look like, we know their names, we even know a lot about their lives, about their family, and it's very personal. When it comes to Palestinian hostages or martyrs, we never know who they are. They're just anonymous kind of people who are Palestinian, so they're almost of much lesser value, it seems, in terms of the way we speak of people. And this is the same whether it's the BBC or Fox. It is always the same. The very personalized individual attention given to the name and the personality and the family of an Israeli hostage. But when it comes to the Palestinians, the victims often of occupation and brutality and ethnic cleansing, we don't know who these people are. We don't know their names. And this is a shocking double standard, which is just routinely there in all the media, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's just the mentality of the West. If you're not white or not from Israel, like a European Jew, you're less than nothing. We see Africa has turned it into a slave camp. Now they're fighting back. Caribbean was the same thing. My people, they literally said, you guys are, that we were savages. That's what they saw Puerto Ricans as. But it's just, it's just a mentality. So it's always a racist mentality, led by the Holy Spirit, led by the Holy Spirit.
As you say, it continues to today. How many Palestinian children have been killed? It's just become a statistic. And that statistic is horrifying when we're thinking about 20,000 plus children that have been murdered. But really, who remembers the names? A few cases have broken through the kind of mainstream media blockade almost to try and get the truth out. We've got examples of Green, the young girl who was murdered, and her grandfather who was also murdered recently, Khalid. And then you have this, other Hind, who was a 6-year-old who was murdered when 300 bullets were fired at the car that she was in with her family. So we barely hear of the names of maybe a few individuals, but in reality, it's a mass slaughter of a population that's taking place now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really important when we look at Palestine not to think of 1948 as the starting point, or not even the 2nd of November 1917, which is when the Balfour Declaration was made.
That's facts.
Because there was an event or events that were much more important that took place prior to this date that are often forgotten and not discussed. And one of those stories is the First Battle of Gaza. So the First Battle of Gaza took place in March 1917. British forces from Egypt attempted to take Gaza, and they were repelled by the Ottoman defenders. And it was quite a significant victory for the Ottomans. The casualties on the British side were about 6,000 versus just over 2,000 on the Ottoman side. So the British knew they had their hands full against the sick man of Europe, let's not forget, as the Ottomans were called at the time. And they returned in April of 1917 for their second encounter, the Second Battle of Gaza. But the Ottomans again routed the forces and actually were able to defend Gaza. So the casualties at that time, I believe, were about 7,000 to 8,000 on the British side and a couple of thousand on the Ottoman side. Now, the British realized this was not going to be easy now to take Gaza. They thought that maybe the Ottomans, known to be the sick man of Europe, known to be much weaker compared to their kind of glorious past, would be an easy kind of opponent to overwhelm. So what the British undertook after the Second Battle of Gaza was really an attempt to weaken Palestine by causing division and dissent across the Arab world, particularly in Jordan.
Divide and rule. We're very good at that.
Divide.
Yeah, that's the whole Alexander of Arabia, I think that's his name. Yeah. So they instilled nationalism to them. So what they did was they went to what we know now as like the Arab rulers. They're like, hey, instead of just this whole Islam, shouldn't this land be yours and all the resources? Why are you sharing it with these other people? Oh, they're Arab, they're Muslim. Come on. And of course, yeah, Lawrence of Arabia. And of course, all these people are going, absolutely, it should be ours. That's why, Saudi Arabia, it's like, this is all ours. We only care about, quote, our people. They massively think of themselves. They have the same way of thinking as the Zionists do. We don't talk about it, but they do. They do see themselves as a superior. Even in, like you see that a lot in Kuwait as well. They see themselves as better. They do. And all these lowly sandal people, ugh, gross. And they instill that, and of course, just like they're like dunya or faith, Allah. They're like dunya all day, every day. We'll just keep pretending we're Muslims, and it's what we have now.
Yeah, in India as well.
Yeah. So this is an interesting picture here. So what you have is the image right at the top there of the train is the first train that came from the Hijaz Railway to Be'er Seba. Be'er Seba, which is now called Beersheba in Zionist-occupied Palestine, was a major kind of city and a location that the Ottomans used to defend Palestine. So it became like almost like a barracks for the Ottoman army. And they would use that city and the supplies that came from there to defend Gaza and other parts in other areas within Palestine. So, and the bottom picture is actually the opening of the train station in Be'er Seba. So the British actually wanted to weaken the Ottomans by disrupting the supply lines into Palestine, because they realized the Ottomans were going to defend Palestine. They were not going to just hand it over. So what you have is the Hijaz Railway that runs from Ottoman Turkey through Syria, through to Palestine, Jordan, and other areas within the Arabian Peninsula. So he went as far as to Medina, as we know.
Yeah.
And there were other important areas such as Aqaba, which is a major port city within Jordan.
Famously.
So this was really the beginnings of the Arab revolt. So you have Lawrence of Arabia working with the Sharif of Mecca, Hussein ibn Ali, to weaken, as you said, to divide and rule the Muslim world. Unfortunately, many of the Arabs, but I would say in proportion, it's really important to remember, we're not talking about large numbers. And this is the case even now. It's not that you have wholesale treachery occurring in the Muslim world. It's unfortunately those in the positions of power that have abandoned the people of Palestine. And
yep, those people in power, I'm telling you, like all these cult Muslim leaders, man, look, they will erect a golden calf tomorrow if you give them enough money. Give them enough money, they'll put up the statue of Baal. Fear of Allah is zero. They don't care. They don't care. Money? Sure, that's it. You could, how easily you could buy them? Oh man. I mean, they're like, okay, we will have to kill your babies. They're like, say no more. Do you want me to make babies so you can kill them? I mean, I'm getting paid still, right? That's it. I'm like, we worship the dunya. What are you talking about? We have to say we're Muslim, but we worship the dunya all day, every day. Dude, us and Shaitan were like this. We're like this. And I don't know why there's no fear. I don't think they truly believe in God anyways. They don't. They really, if you truly believe in Allah, you couldn't do this. So they don't believe it. They don't believe any of that stuff. They believe in like, okay, money's the God.
It was then the same thing. It was the people in power who saw an opportunity to try and kind of create their own kind of government. They were promised an Arab Khilafah,
Yes.
As many people know, the McMahon-Hussein correspondence between McMahon, who was, I think, the High Commission in Egypt at the time, and Hussein ibn Ali, was that they would promise them an Arab Khilafah, a whole swathe of land that would be under their rule. So Sharif of Mecca worked with Lawrence of Arabia and the British forces to weaken the Ottoman defenders. So actually these pictures, these photos were taken by myself 2 years ago, just before the genocide on Gaza. So this was in the summer of 2023. And the image on the left-hand side is actually a close-in shot of the Yarmouk bridge, where the Hijaz Railway crossed from Syria into Jordan. And as you can see, it's been blown up. So this is an area where the Hijaz Railway was blown up by those attempting to kind of create this disruption within Jordan. And the image on the right is within one of the castles in Aqaba. So Aqaba also fell to the Arab revolt. So these were two really instrumental elements of the victory of the Arab revolt, you could say, against the Ottomans in Jordan.
And I like to see the name of it, Arab revolt, because it was the belief that they wanted an Arab caliphate. Very careful. The words Arab caliphate should be Arab. They should be Arab. Should be Arab. They pretty much took the Quran and wiped their own butts with it, threw it away, completely. And everybody went right through it with it. Like, yep, let's go, let's do it. We didn't believe in this stuff anyways.
Because Aqaba was used to supply Ottoman forces, and so was the Hijaz Railway. And the Hijaz Railway was attacked in many places across Jordan. It wasn't just in Yarmouk, but that's just one example. So then the British came back in November of 1917 to take Gaza. And this time they were able to overwhelm it quite quickly. So within a couple of days, on the 1st and the 2nd of November, they pretty much secured their victory over Gaza. And Be'er Seba actually fell a day earlier, on the 31st of October 1917, because the British actually diverted troops there, knowing of its strategic importance. On the 7th of November, Allenby himself walked into Gaza. And it's really interesting that a lot of people are fixated with the date, the 2nd of November, 1917, because that's when the Balfour Declaration was made. But this is a really interesting clip, newspaper clip. The British captured the historic city of Gaza, and that actually occurred, obviously, in the early days of November. And it was on the 2nd of November, 1917, that the Balfour Declaration was made. So when people think of the Balfour Declaration as almost kind of a promise for a Jewish homeland, they have to remember that what the British needed to do first was actually take Palestine, to give that promise to the Jewish people that they would have their own homeland on the homes and the lands of Palestinians. So, it's really important to remember this part of history, the 1917 campaigns of the battles of Gaza. And now when we think of Gaza, that's kind of the last defense of Palestine. There's something quite, symbolic about that as well. A few years after the fall of Gaza, it was only 7 years later, the Ottoman Khilafat was abolished. This was the last Khalif who was sent into exile.
Turkish assembly.
And it's really important to kind of understand how the Khilafah viewed its responsibility towards Palestine. Because what we have to remember, we're living a very kind of limited part of the history of Palestine. It's 76 years of occupation, Zionist occupation. And we know that the Crusaders occupied Palestine for about 90 years. But for 1,200 years prior, what had happened is that the Muslims had ruled this land, all the way from Umar al-Khattab, the second Caliph of Islam, of the Muslims, all the way through to the last Ottoman Caliph. They were actually ruled by Muslims. So the Ottomans ruled Palestine for 400 years. And we have to remember, when we're looking at Ottoman Palestine, it was very much an integral part of the state. Unlike how we see lands today where Palestine, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon are all separate, they were actually very much one piece of land. The way I like to kind of compare it now, when you're traveling between Middlesex and Essex, or up to Oxfordshire and Nottinghamshire and wherever else in terms of within Britain, you don't, when you're on the motorway and you're crossing these different counties, you never look at them as different areas. You just see them as all part of one larger
And
country.
you didn't need a passport, presumably, but a student from Damascus,
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
Cairo to Jerusalem, he didn't need a passport, a visa, didn't need to go
Exactly.
through these horrendous immigration controls that I see Muslims are going through these controls within Muslim country, between Muslim countries that were once, as you say, one polity.
And free travel. Free travel
were
to the
free
entire
to
Middle
move
East.
and travel as they wished.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point you make. And just to give you some real examples in terms of my own family. So from my dad's side, it was actually only a couple of generations before my dad, maybe his great-great-grandfather, something along those lines. They came from Egypt. And from my mother's side, my mother's own grandmother is Turkish. She's from Ankara in Turkey. So in fact, my auntie was telling us a story a few years ago when we were in Palestine, that she retained her Turkish accent even till her death. And the Turks, for example, pronounce certain words a bit differently. So he used to say Habibi, Habibi. She couldn't say the word Habibi in the same way. And she remembers that as a young, my auntie as a young girl remembers my great-grandmother still retaining her Turkish accent all the way through to the end of her life. So, it was very much one country, one nation, one state, and people did not see any difference in it. So I always make the point that actually in Gallipoli, I think there was 2 divisions of Arab Ottoman soldiers defending the land. And within Gaza, there were Turkish divisions defending the land. So they didn't see themselves as, Turkish or Arab in that sense. They saw themselves as part of one entity, one authority. And in my father's village, Kanir, my father used to know someone who was a soldier in the Ottoman army. So he used to tell them stories when they were young boys about how he fought with the Ottoman army against Russia. So this is all within, the history of people that are still alive with us now, telling us those stories. So it's really interesting when we kind of take a step back and look at our current divisions and problems within the Middle East. As you say, needing visas, very difficult to travel, and actually what people used to do, where they would trade between these different areas, like you would leave from Jordan to Palestine, trade for the day, and go back on the same day because you were seen as just traveling across the same land.
Can you imagine the Day of Judgment? All these people who just betrayed the Ummah, who betrayed people, everything, and all these Muslim leaders. Can you imagine what it'd be like what's going to be like for them in the Day of Judgment? Man, I joke around and say, I don't want to be anywhere around, Paul, the Day of Judgment. They have so much blood on their hands. I'm like, man, I don't want nothing. I don't want to be anywhere near this people when their accounts are open. Woo, man.
This is a very famous statement that was made by Sultan Abdulhamid II, and this is when Herzl tried to make a bid to purchase Palestine. So he offered to pay approximately, I believe it was about 20% of the Ottoman debt at the time, which ran into billions in terms of kind of modern equivalents. And Abdulhamid II came back in terms of, gave him a very firm response, saying that he would never sell this land because it's not his land to sell. It's been irrigated with the blood of the martyrs, and he will defend it, essentially. As the Sultan, he saw his responsibility to defend the lands under his authority. And it's just a really amazing contrast to what we're seeing today, where Palestine's been sold by so many of the regimes in the locality. Some are still trading with the Zionist entity. They still have diplomatic relations. And we know that they even suppress their own people who call out the kind of betrayal. So we've seen that, unfortunately, iftar parties taking part.
And you know what's funny? In Saudi Arabia, they say that you're not a real sheikh until you get arrested, because if you speak against the, regardless, it doesn't matter if you use hadith or Quran or anything, if you point out what they're doing is wrong, you will get arrested. You will. People always like, oh, look at Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi Arabia is probably at this point the biggest traitor to the Ummah right now. I mean, they're up there. They're probably the biggest traitor. I mean, bigger, yeah. So, no, not the really, just by the police. Here, just the police. the sheikhs they get all the time get arrested for speaking against like Arabia, what they're doing. I mean, they call in hadith. Hey, this is wrong. This is a sin. You're gonna get arrested. They arrest the heck out of you. So yeah, people because they're comfortable. It's a rich area on it. The other Muslims over there are like, yeah, absolutely, no problem. And there have been more and more. Like at the beginning, there was a lot of like walks and stuff on it, like to free on it. But when's the last time you've heard anybody say anything? Because now everybody's kind of like, I mean, we tried. So
in place in Muslim capitals, Israeli embassies. It's happened in the UAE. It's happened in Cairo. These are really kind of distasteful, very distasteful things to see when the Muslims of Gaza are going through a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people question, why did Palestine fall so easily if the Palestinians were there and they could have mounted the defense against the Zionist state or the beginnings of the Zionist state. And what people don't realize is that the British were working with the Zionists. It was a hand-in-glove kind of operation. So you have 1917, the Balfour Declaration, the occupation of Palestine. Over the next 30-odd years, what had happened was actually a very concerted effort to ensure that the Zionists would have a foothold in Palestine. So you had the Notrim, and the Notrim, for example, were part of the Palestinian police force, but really they were answerable to the Haganah. And the Haganah were obviously what would become the Zionist gangs that would occupy Palestine and would then become the IDF as we know it today. So it was a very concerted effort. Many of those people that served in the Notrim and the Haganah were actually British soldiers who fought in World War II, Jewish soldiers who actually were trained and equipped by the British and then came to Palestine as refugees and then worked to undermine the Palestinians there. So it was very much a concerted effort. And there was a very good quote that I'll try and pick up in a minute, because I don't think I have it in front of me, where what essentially some British historians said is that if you look at the Palestinian police force, it was really a tacit attempt to ensure that the Zionists were equipped and able to occupy Palestine once the British would leave. So as we know, the British had Palestine under the League of Nations mandate, and then when they withdrew in 1948, those who had the upper hand were the Zionist terror gangs, so the Haganah, the Irgun, the Lehi, and they were able to overwhelm the Palestinian defenders. What really was a betrayal was that the Arab armies never mounted a real defense of Palestine. So what you have is General Glubb, who was the head of the British forces. He was the head of the Jordanian forces, but he's a British general. He was the one who led the defense of Palestine. But there's something very peculiar about that, because you've got Britain, who's already kind of promised Palestine to be a Jewish homeland, being defended by a British general. So there was no real attempt to defend Palestine. And there's a very interesting story that I'll tell you later on about one of the officers in the Jordanian army who actually exposed a lot of those crimes and talked about them in his kind of future memoirs. And this is the man, Mashhur Hadith al-Jazi. He was a Jordanian general who fought a famous battle in Karama in Jordan. So this was in 1968, and the anniversary was actually just a few days ago, on the 21st of March. So this battle occurred a year after the Six-Day War, when Jordan, Egypt, Syria, all lost territory to the Zionist entity. And he was an officer in the Jordanian army, both in 1948 and also in 1967. And he felt that 1967 was particularly a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. And I also have an uncle who was an officer in the Jordanian army at the time. And they talk about how they were asked to retreat without fighting and actually only suffered a few hundred casualties, which isn't normal when you're defending a land. You would expect to suffer much higher casualties if you were really entrenched in defending that land. And that's why Jordan fell very, very quickly in a matter of a few days, because actually King Hussein of Jordan ordered a retreat of those forces back to the East Bank. So General Jazi in 1968 was presented with a very difficult situation. The Israelis mounted a huge offensive against Jordan. It was on the pretext that there was a Palestinian refugee camp called Karama in Jordan, and that they were using that to undertake militant operations against the Zionist entity. So their pretext was that we need to go in and dismantle this camp.
Weird.
So there was a tacit approval by King Hussein to allow this to happen. But Al-Jazi knew that it wasn't only that the camp that they were after, but the main objective was actually the high ground within Jordan in an area called As-Salt, which used to be the capital of Jordan, which overlooks the whole of Palestine. So as we can see historically, Israel's always looked to protect itself by taking more land. So the Golan Heights in Syria, very strategic. They took the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, again, very strategic, and gave them this huge kind of strength and depth to defend themselves. So this area in Jordan was also seen as crucially important to take. So General Al-Jazi did something that is quite unique. It was a bit like the Omar Ali Bayraktar in 1948 in the Battle of Jenin. He broke the chain of command, essentially. So he took a decision himself to engage the Israeli forces entering into Jordan. And he tells this story himself. So the picture in the left of him as an older man is actually given as a series of interviews on Al Jazeera in 1999, a couple of years before.
You heard it, right? Yeah, you heard it too.
And he goes in great detail about what happened that day. And I've watched the whole interview. So what he says is, I prayed Salat al-Fajr and I put my hands up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and said, oh Allah, we are protecting ourselves, or we are protecting what is our haqq, what is our right. And they are trying to take what is our haqq. So let the haqq defeat the batil, let the haqq defeat the falsehood today. And then he ordered the Jordanian forces to engage the Israeli offenders or the Israeli aggression into Jordan. So they crossed the bridge and the Jordanians immediately started firing at them. And he also did something quite amazing. And this is again in an Al Jazeera documentary. And it's mentioned by a British historian actually, that he asked all his officers to take an oath on the Quran. He goes, I'm asking you to take an oath that you will fight to your death to defend Jordan against this aggression. And he made them all do that. And he made them go to the front lines and fight with the soldiers. Now, you have to remember, Jordan was much weaker in terms of militarily compared to Israel. They had no air force, while Israel had an air force. They brought in 30,000 soldiers to mount the invasion of Jordan. But the battle went in the favor of the Jordanians. And at one point in the battle, he says that we had managed to repel their ground forces, so they brought in their air forces into the battle. And they used like artillery pieces to act as kind of anti-aircraft missiles. And they managed to down 7 Israeli jets that day. And at one point, he goes, as the bombs were falling, he said, maybe I've caused the Jordanian army to be destroyed this day. Because he could not believe the overwhelming force they were using to overwhelm the Jordanian defenses. But they were very successful in the battle. And actually, about 4 hours into the battle, King Hussein of Jordan calls up Jazi and says that the Israelis are offering a ceasefire. Jazi does something that is completely unprecedented. He puts the phone down and disregards the order.
Wow.
And he continues to fight, and he achieves a very, very famous victory. The real stats will never be told because we know that the Israelis will never admit their real casualties. But the Jordanians estimated that there were somewhere in the region of 1,200 to 1,400 Israeli casualties that day, which was a really huge victory with much, much smaller casualties on the Jordanian.
Well, alaikum salam. How are you doing from East London? Alhamdulillah. But yeah, it's so amazing that when they, especially when they said they swore an oath to Allah on the Quran to Allah, and after Fajr prayer, he said, he pretty much put it on Allah's hands, like the olden days, like Allah, if we have to be victorious, let it be so, and became like true believing Muslims, alhamdulillah. And what happens? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him victory. It's just alhamdulillah. And that is what they don't want. That's why all these Muslim leaders don't want a unified ummah. That's why the West doesn't want a unified ummah. When you got people that truly embrace Islam, that truly believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can't defeat them. You can't. That's why all these fake Muslim leaders, they're not Muslims. They're not. They don't want that. They know they will collapse. They will fall.
Palestinian side. The Palestinians actually fought with the Jordanian army side by side. So the Palestinian fighters fought alongside the Jordanian army that day. So General Al-Jazi has a very, very interesting story because a few years later, we have Black September. And this is when Palestinian militias are attacked by Jordanian forces. And it's essentially a civil war within Jordan between the Palestinians and the Jordanians. General Al-Jazi is the chief of staff of the Jordanian forces at this time. And his wife tells the story. She says that he was very concerned for the life of a Muslim, and he never wanted to engage in anything haram. So he refused to use his power within the Jordanian army to engage in the civil war. And he actually resigned on that during that period. So, he's a very unique general. And he's an example, I think, to many generals out there that you can retain your Islamic identity and understand the importance of looking after this ummah. And during his interviews, for example, with Al Jazeera in 1999, he says that normalization is an absolute betrayal. And he predicts something that I think is inevitable. He says there will finally be a showdown between the local Arab armies and Muslim armies and the Israeli occupation, because they have no intention to bring peace to this land, and it will ultimately lead to war. I think he was a man who was ahead of his time, and he knew what betrayals were going to unfold in the years after his death.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a really interesting map that I like to show people, because a lot of people tend to talk about Palestine through a modern lens. And they look at it from the lens of maybe British Mandate Palestine or a kind of a nationalistic Palestine. But Palestine, as I mentioned, was part of a wider administrative area called Blad al-Sham. And on the map on the left is the Blad al-Sham of Umar al-Khattab. So when Umar al-Khattab took over this area, he created the administrative areas within that region. So if you look at the map very carefully, what you'll see is Palestine is right at the bottom left-hand side. That covers all the way from Gaza. It covers Beit al-Maqdis, Jerusalem, Nablus, and other northern towns in Palestine. But you also notice there's other places within Palestine, which is like Tabariya, Tiberias. This area is actually under Al-Urdun, which is Jordan. So Jordan, modern day Jordan, as we know, is on the East Bank and has no reference or relation to what Al-Urdun was previously. So you have the south of Lebanon, the north of Jordan, and parts of modern day Jordan that fell under the administrative region of Al-Urdun. And then you have Dimashq, which is from Damascus all the way through to pretty much the whole modern day Jordan. And you have Hims, which is like in the central part of Syria. And then you have Qanasirin in the north of Syria. And you can even see that takes up part of southern Turkey. So you can see it's a completely different map to what we're used to today. And the reason being is Muslims never viewed themselves in that way, in that kind of nationalistic lens. They understood that they were part of a much bigger state. So this was a region called Blad al-Sham, which we would call a walaya, a district, a region. And that was part of, obviously, a much bigger Islamic state, which covered the Arab Peninsula, and then we know it covered Egypt, and it covered many, many more areas in the years, Iraq and Iran, etc., and many, many other areas after the death of Umar al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu. And the map on the right is actually the administrative regions under the Ottoman period. And what's really interesting about this, and I want you just to focus on one area, Haifa. So Haifa in red. My father would have lived just to the east of Haifa in the town of Kannir. That actually falls under the Vilayat. So what we view today as Beirut and Lebanon and Palestine were all intermingled. And I think some people, unfortunately, the reason why they feel that they have to talk about Palestine in a modern lens is almost as a rebuttal to the Zionist accusation that there was no Palestine. But that's actually a false argument. There's no need for you to go down that argument. The argument about Palestine being occupied is about the right of people to a land. So people, whether they're Muslim, Christians, or Jews, lived in a land that they owned. They had deeds to houses, they had deeds to lands, they farmed this area, they lived in these lands for centuries. They were the rightful owners of that land. So when we look at Palestine, it's not about whether the Palestinian map as we know it today was occupied in 1948. It's really about the principle of how land was taken by force through ethnic cleansing and murder and actually replaced by settler colonialists.
I guess today we're looking at this whole history through the lens of modern nation states. This whole idea, which is a very kind of modern European idea, which has been exported to the Middle East now. The whole of the Muslim world now is cut up into these tiny, often very tiny statelets, like the UAE or whatever, tiny little places. But before they were part of this much bigger Islamic polity. Or not, but they didn't have these nation state identities. It's like everything's identity politics now, identify as this. But you're saying that that's anachronistic. That's not how it was. But people did have identity as people of that land. They were a people, and this land, this people had been dispossessed. Whether or not they belonged in this modern nation state, which, as I say, is a very recent thing, and anachronistically to project it back in time. But people do that, you're saying, because of the Zionist argument. They say, well, there was no Palestinian state before Israel had a state. And so we feel we must kind of meet that at the same level, with the same concepts. But this is a mistake. But you're saying we don't have to therefore give up the argument. The argument is, the reality is still, there were people, there were a land, they were ethnically cleansed, they were, as indeed they are still now. So, yeah, that's very helpful.
Exactly that point. And when you think about Umar al-Khattab, when he opened up the land of Palestine and Blad Sham and all the other areas, what was unique about the Islamic approach to kind of liberation or opening up the lands to Islam was not that the people would be forced out of their homes and displaced and murdered. They were protected within their lands. So we famously know how Umar al-Khattab treated the people of Palestine, and even went as far as ensuring the Jews were protected within Palestine, who had been mistreated under Christian rule in the past. So it's a very different view of politics, because Islam views its authority as a melting pot for people of all faiths and all ethnicities. And that's what the Ottomans, for example, achieved in the 400 years before the Zionist occupation. So I think it's a really important point to make, because it goes way beyond just Palestine. It's the way we view ourselves in terms of our identity, as you've mentioned. So moving on to a map that's a lot more problematic. This was the first draft of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And I always find this map very, very interesting, because if you look carefully, Syria isn't the Syria that you know today. It actually extends into parts of Iraq. And there's one area in particular it extends to in the first draft, which is Mosul. And Mosul is now part of Iraq. In 1916, when the French and the British were discussing how they were going to carve up the Middle East, the French were originally going to take Mosul as part of Syria. And in an excellent video that came out early on in the genocide, a Yemeni brother explains the kind of ridiculous concept of nationalism. He goes, can you imagine that had Mosul fallen into the original draft and it would have been Syrian land, we would have all waved the Syrian flag, sang the Syrian anthem, called ourselves Suri, I am Syrian. But because the 1917 or 1918 draft finally took Mosul into British Iraq, they now raise the Iraqi flag and sing the Iraqi anthem and call themselves Iraqi. So we've fallen for their lies, hook, line, and sinker. We've totally bought into it. We sanctify these borders. We respect them when they should be given no respect. Look at Iraq. There is no Jordan in this map. Look at Palestine. It's half the size.
What is that purple above the red Palestine? You've got this purple, and then this larger thing to the right of Turkey. What's that? What do they call that? I mean,
I'm not sure. That would have been modern day Lebanon and southern Turkey, from the looks of it. Yeah.
I'm wondering, do they have a name for it? This is the
I don't know in that time if there was a name, but I know in the original Sykes-Picot Agreement, southern Turkey was part of the plan. But I believe the negotiation with the Young Turks and the future Turkish Republic was that they weren't going to take Turkish land, and that became obviously part of the Turkish Republic. But Syria, Iraq, all those other lands fell as kind of British colonies initially, and then they were handed out to the Sharif of Mecca's lineage.
He said something very interesting. How Muslims just sanctified it. Like people say, "Well, no, I'm Iraqi," or I'm the it's brainwashed. Like one of the things that even Puerto Ricans we still do. We call the island of Puerto Rico. We call them Borican, because the people there beforehand, the people that were slaughtered by the colonialists, used to call it Borinquen. So that's what we call ourselves Boricua. We to this day refuse to use the term that was given by our oppressors. So we still call ourselves Boricuas because the island is called Borinquen. Not, we can't, so it's, but like most of them, they're like, yep, all right, yep. That's what the white people said. So that's what we're going to have to do. Yep. The white people said there's a border here. So that's what we're going to do.
So this brings us now to the genocide. And I think it's fair to say we have not witnessed, I think, something as horrific.
Yeah. So Puerto Rico means rich port. There was a lot of gold in the island. Spain, from Spain, they just called it, hey, this is the rich port. And that's what they called it. Yeah. There was indigenous people there. They raped and pillaged them when they pretty much worked them to death. They brought in slaves from Africa because they were all just about wiped out. So, and then started the intermingling and stuff. That's what we have European, Native American, and African in our blood because of the intermingling. But yeah, no, it destroyed the indigenous people there.
And as premeditated. And actually, nothing that's been live streamed to our phones day and night for 17 months. There have been genocides of the same equivalence. I'm sure what the Rohingya Muslims went through, where tens and tens of thousands were killed and raped, was as atrocious and as horrific as what's happening to the people of Gaza.
I'm always reminded the IDF's words, or the Israeli government's claim that the IDF are very surgical, they only take out very precise locations, avoiding any civilian damages. And here we have, and there are many scenes like this, of a scene of utter devastation. The only historical analogy I'm aware of is Nagasaki or Hiroshima, where nuclear weapons, atomic bomb rather, was dropped on these cities in Japan, where of course the intention was to destroy the whole city, and that's the only equivalent. Clearly, that calls out the lie of this, because you can see the systematic devastation for miles and miles and miles. There's nothing surgical about this. It's
no. It's very, very intentional. In fact, there was a report that just came out that Halevi, the head of the Israeli, the IDF, and Netanyahu apparently had a bust up in one of the early kind of calls or early kind of emergency cabinets following the attack on Gaza, where Halevi said that they attacked 500 targets, and Netanyahu said, "Why haven't you attacked? Sorry, 1,500 targets." He said, "Why haven't you attacked 5,000?" He goes, "Because we don't have 5,000 targets to attack." Even the 1,500 they were attacking were killing tens of thousands of civilians. If you're saying 3 times that, you could just imagine what the casualty figures would have been. They're already well over 100,000 based on the lowest estimates, really. I mean, the School of Tropical Medicine, I believe, in London, estimated that at the end of June 2024, there were over 65,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza. At that,
it's hard. Like my heart is, it's like, okay. So it's like the so-called Muslim leaders are okay with it. They're okay. They're completely fine with it. Genocide, that's fine. Nobody cares. They don't care. So they're completely soulless individuals. Completely soulless, and they completely worship Satan. Completely. So that's a guarantee. And I see that, and it's like, let's say if tomorrow this whole ends, there will be zero repercussions. Zero. Nobody in the entire cabinet of Israel, nothing will happen to them. Nothing. Nothing at all. And every single Muslim leader will be okay with it. And again, it is the Shia are the only people who are like, it's enough is enough. Regardless, you say, oh, they're using this as an excuse. The thing is, again, the Shia are the only ones who have who are okay with dying for a cause. the ones that I get the most hatred from all the Muslims are the only ones who will say enough's enough. Oh yeah, that's true, but isn't that odd? Like, isn't that just like, you know, they could say, oh, they're just because they just hate Israel or whatever on it. The entire Ummah should hate Israel at this point. But it's only the Shia who are willing to put themselves on the line. They're like, it's fine. We'll die. That's fine. But then they're like, okay, well, you know, we become martyrs, you know, halas, you know. And that's how they view things. Like, all right, great. We go to you know, we go to you know, we go to heaven. Alhamdulillah. Sunnis are not tied. Sunnis are not tied at all. They really aren't. They're not tied. That's a lie. That's the biggest lie on Shaitan. They're not. You know how easily economically they could make pressure on it if they wanted to, But I just always found it odd. He said, who's gonna mess with the yeah, it said who's gonna mess with the US military and any of its proxies? The Shias are. The Shias are okay with that. The Shias will. They don't care. You know? And again, you say, well, who's gonna mess with the US? Like, everybody should be like, okay, whatever. Bring it, you know. Allah's make it a martyr. If you fight truly for the sake of Allah, for what is right, Allah says He will grant you victory. And He says it many times over and over again. It's like, you know, who do you fear? Fear them or you fear me, Allah? Right? Mine is the only thing that wins is what Allah wills it to win. So when you say, you know, and it's kind of like the brainwash. It's like the U.S. military runs the show. You know that they made they started doing war games, and if the U.S. goes to and fights Iran as it stands now on it, the best case scenario is that they will lose a third of everything they throw at them. But it's not easy. Well, the Quran says it is. The Quran says it is. Well, it's not easy, Aki. The Quran says it is. I said the Quran says it is. If we're a true Muslim, the Quran says it is. There you go. That's what it is. That's it. So, you know, do we fear Allah or do you feel, you know, this supposed? So that's where it stands. That's where my stand is.
That point, and that was still, you know, what, 7-8 months ago. So you can imagine the numbers are easily over 100,000.
And Afghanistan, not to mention, in Afghanistan, people with flip-flops, with nothing, held out against the U.S., which is not easy, to a point where they had to withdraw. 20 years. Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. They have flip-flops and some machine guns. But it's not easy. They have flip-flops. The Houthis have even less. And the U.S. doesn't know what to do. The Houthis they don't even know what to do with them. The nations will overcome you like people at a table. Afghanistan has proven that statement of it's not easy is wrong. The Houthis are showing the same thing. People with flip-flops, man. I don't have any bulletproof vests. I just got flip-flops. And in a belief that they had done all that to Gaza and Israel is losing. And you still say, well, it's not easy. You see all that and Israel is losing. We need to remember Allah. When people stand proper with the name of Allah, that's it. It's game over. You know, the Khans, Genghis Khan, killed at that time 20% of the world. And when they met the Muslims, they immediately went into a stalemate and then became Muslims. What more do you want me to say? What more?
The kind of premeditated attacks on hospitals, on journalists. So the 2 journalists that were martyred yesterday, they take up the toll to now 210 journalists murdered in Gaza.
It's unprecedented.
The whole of World War II, you didn't have that level. Mm-hmm. And World War II lasted for 6 years and encompassed most of the world. Mm-hmm. But you're talking about Gaza, which encompasses a tiny population of 2.5 million people. And yet you have 210 journalists that have been murdered. It's really off the scale. 80% of masajid have been destroyed or damaged. The 3 churches that existed have been destroyed or damaged. Schools, hospitals. We've all seen the videos and the images ourselves. There's nothing to be hidden. It's all in plain view for the world to see. And this is just one of those masajid that have been destroyed. And in fact, there's been, I think 3 were attacked yesterday. So something along the lines of 1,000 masajid have been destroyed or damaged. Over 80% of all the masajid in Gaza.
But, alhamdulillah, Allah says though that He gave us the world as our masjid. That's why they still stand up, and alhamdulillah. It's almost like Allah knew they will come, and they'll know, hey, He gave us the world as our masjid.
This is a really, really powerful image that I used at a talk recently. And it's about the story of 2 churches. The story of this a church in Gaza, the 3rd oldest church in the entire world, and the church in Al-Quds that Umar al-Khattab was famously asked, would you like to pray here? And he refused with a very, very well-known answer, which he said, if I was to pray in this church today, it is possible that Muslims in the future will take this decision of mine to mean that they could take this church as their own. So I often find it quite unbelievable that the Muslims are the ones being demonized in the media. But it was our Muslim Khalif 1400 years ago who refused to pray in a church. Let's remember what he did. He refused to pray in a church because he did not want to take away the sanctity of that church for the Christian worshippers. And yet, churches are being destroyed wholesale, and Christians are being killed wholesale in Gaza, but yet they're not being called out for crimes against humanity and crimes against religious minorities. It just shows you how upside down the world is. And in fact, I'm going to use an example that I heard an American use recently. And there's a Palestinian dish called maqluba, which means upside down. You cook the meat at the bottom, the potatoes and everything else, and then you flip it over. And it's called maqluba because it's flipped over. He goes, the world has become maqluba. It's all upside down. And that's the only way I can describe it. I don't know, I don't have the words anymore to describe the anger and the frustration that we all feel when we see that a genocide is being enabled by the media, by politicians, by the Muslim regimes. And yet the person who had so much respect for people of other religions would not pray in a church. Just let that sink in for a minute. Just think about the difference here. But yet it's not the way it's presented in the media.
No.
I think it's really important that whatever I share today, it's not just a story. It's not just a personal story. It's not just about what the experiences of my father were, 76, 77 years ago, nor the stories of all those.
No, they know that's happening. They don't comment on it. There was Tucker Carlson. He used to be a Fox news anchor. He does his own thing on YouTube and everything on it. He interviewed a priest, and the priest was almost in tears, saying, "Why aren't Christians coming to our defense?" All because Christians, this view of they want the genocide to happen because they think it could bring the end times or whatever. And he was just like, I doubt this man will stay a priest for too long. I guarantee he'll become a Muslim soon. Like, just a willful okay with the slaughtering of Christians, and then none of them are like, everybody's just like, it doesn't happen. Like, it doesn't happen. It's not happening. Or if you tell them about it, it's like, what about in Ghana, all these people are getting beheaded, and they're like, what are you talking about? And it's like, and what's happening in Ghana, it's like, those, what I think they said some Christians, whatever, that wasn't because of like Muslims or extremists. That was from gangs that are over there who are all like either into like voodoo and stuff like that. It's like, what? Yeah. It's the, and I always say this, that what happened in World War II was a learning experience for the Zionists, because it showed them what people are willing to ignore as long as you're able to like wield like a little power. Like it showed them like, oh, if Hitler can do this, we could do this at a bigger scale. And it was a teaching experience. Oh, people were okay. People, will turn a blind eye as long as as long as you demonize and make the people you're doing that to less than people. Yeah. And that's just not even, they do a lot more than that.
Those people who are ethnically cleansed. It's not the story of even what the people of Gaza are facing, because that would be kind of relieving ourselves of our own responsibility towards this. And I think it's important to look at what role can we play, because like Gaza has changed the world. Let's be honest. I don't think there's any incident in history that has been so well documented. As I said, there's been genocides before, but not one where it's live streamed to your phone day in, day out, where if I now pick up my phone, I'll have 20 or 30 new reports about atrocities in Gaza. It's there is no precedence in terms of what we've seen. Now, what role can we play in the West, elsewhere? And I think it's really important to understand how far we've come. Because if we go back 17 months, there was a narrative that was being pushed by the mainstream media, by politicians, that it all started on the 7th of October. I think it's fair to say that has been completely, that narrative has been completely lost. And now people see very much so that this started decades and decades before with the illegal occupation of Palestine. And they've also started to kind of connect the dots in terms of nationalism, the divisions in our lands, the lack of leadership. And they've realized this is part of a much, much bigger game. And even capitalism in terms of, is this really just an Israeli genocide, or is this a US, German, UK, Western-backed genocide? And how much is the mainstream media complicit? I think we've managed to win so many of those narratives. So I think it's important to understand we do have a role to play.
Actually, it started in 1917. That's actually where it started. You could actually say it started in the 18. Okay, so beforehand, the same group wanted to actually start beforehand, years earlier in the 1800s, because they wanted actually a portion. Yeah, 1880. That they wanted a portion of Arizona, and the U.S. said no. That's actually where it started. That's actually where it started. There were some papers on it, and they wanted a portion of Arizona to become the new Israel, and they were like, nope. No. And then they, so yeah, this is starting for a while. It was huge, but it started way beforehand.
Right. But that role has to continue, whether it's through social media, through talks, through podcasts like this, whatever means that we have to kind of start challenging those causes of division, those causes of betrayal that have led us to this position of the genocide in 2025. Because if we don't do that, what we're doing then is really just reflecting on a story. And that's not what we as Muslims should do.
Mm-hmm.
This image is of 4 Muslim countries being bombed: Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Gaza, and Yemen. That is the reality. It's not even just Gaza that's being attacked. We're being attacked across various countries, but yet there is still no response from those who have the means to do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the very least, where are the diplomatic measures? Where are the economic sanctions? They're not happening, let alone military intervention from those who are capable. And in fact, I just want to mention something and amplify a message that the journalist Hossam mentioned before he was martyred yesterday. He said, "Where are you, O people of UAE? Where are you, O people of Saudi? Where are you, O people of Jordan and Egypt?" The people of Gaza have repeated this call. There are hundreds and hundreds of videos of them pleading with Muslims, pleading
They're
with
not
the
Muslims.
local
That's the problem.
Arab people, the regimes,
They're
the
not-
armies,
they're not
to
Muslims.
rescue them from this genocide. And it's something that should be very natural. In fact,
Well,
I've seen
if I may interrupt, I hear what you're saying, and of course, we'll completely understand that. But to be devil's advocate for a second, countries like Jordan, for example, are very, very weak countries. I'm not putting them down. They are just very. They have very little power. Indeed, they're wholly dependent on the United States and to some extent Britain as well, just to exist.
And he's wrong on that because Africa just proved it. And they're even weak. Africa literally just proved it. Africa right now is proving it right now. Left and right. Completely proved it. And it just needs to be a need.
And what realistic hope is there in Jordan in league with Lebanon, in league with Egypt and so on, to actually, because they're not confronting Israel, they're confronting.
I want to share something that maybe he doesn't know. Before the Saudi prince, the old Saudi king, the father of the Saudi princes now on there. At one point, I forgot who it was, what president was there on it. He said something that irked him. Kind of like we're strong or something like that on it. He said, "Okay, bet. Okay." He made with a swift of a pen, because of oil and everything on it. He made the price of oil and gas in the U.S. so high on energy. It was so high that people had to use horses again. It was chaos across the entire United States, and the president went back. King Faisal, yes. Ahmad knows everything. Ahmad knows everything on it. He crippled the entire United States. He apologized to the king, reversed on it, so he will come back. And yeah, in one day, literally. So yeah, King Faisal literally proved that, and I love my brother Paul. Alhamdulillah, I love him. I call him my spirit animal. It's a joke, but he proved that it could be done easily. Easily, he did it. Easily, he proved it, and there was no threat of fighting or nothing on it. Not about nothing. He said, "He's my bad. Whoa, my bad. Let's not. Let's go back to the sitting table. Let's get this back again." Yeah. So yeah, he's wrong about that. It's already been proven. So it's already been done.
Confronting the United States because the two are one. Israel is the 51st state. I know Canada's supposed to be the 51st state.
all of the war games say there's a high chance that we will lose against a fight against Iran right now. Against Iran, there's a good chance to fight. Like logistically, especially in the terrain over there, these people live there. No, it'll be, and even their air defenses that they have are super cheap. They have really super cheap air defenses. They are also extremely good. And the systems that they have in Iran, and they're talking about a staggering amount of billions of dollars of loss if they try airstrike because of the losses of their jets and everything on it. They said economically, if Iran were to hold off and just shoot down the planes there because they take forever to build and everything, and they cost sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars on it, it will economically destroy the U.S. again. So the Houthis right now, still, Houthis are like, come at me, bro. Like, these people are built different. These people are completely built different. They're like, bring it on. Israel literally did something that nobody thought it could do. They actually brought the two fighting ones from Syria. Syria is one now. They're completely one. The people, the Kurds that are fighting, they became one. And now Turkey and Syria have completely combined because of the hatred they have right now against Israel. And they're like, what is going on? And Turkey has the eighth strongest army in the world. So there's that as well.
Yeah.
But there's more likely to be Israel, in fact, in de facto, if not in reality, not legally. One is saying, in effect, that these countries should go up and take up arms against the United States, which is by far the biggest superpower in the world. So plus Europe, of course, because Britain will then throw in as well.
Allah.
Is this a winnable war? Is what I'm trying to say. It's not that the frustration is real and authentic, but is it winnable, or are we?
Again, do they not have one of these? Does he not have one of these? It's called the Quran. Because I read some of this stuff. Is this winnable? I read the whole. Is it winnable? Am I the only one? Like, is it winnable? I have 114 chapters that say it is. That's just me, though. I do have a book that has 114 chapters that say it is. So, you know what? Maybe I'm just an extremist. Maybe I'm one of those kooky people who are like, oh, you're too religious. Man, there you go. I'll say it. I'm one of those too religious extremists. No, you got to think about, oh, you think this, the God's just going to make it happen. Just like that. Yes. Because I have 114 chapters to say he will. But, hey, maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I'm getting wrong. You're getting shadow banned. Man, look at my views on my channel, man. I've been so shadow banned.
Just throwing ourselves against Israel because it's so unjust and we're just so angry. Do you know what I mean?
And optimistic? I'm not optimistic. I just believe in what I wrote, what I read. But that's what, people say, it's being optimistic stuff on it. Is it optimistic to have faith in Allah? Is that optimism? And if we're to the point where it's just optimism, we have become Christians. That's it. Really. If this is optimism, and then we're just Christians at this point, what are we doing? What's the point? What's the point of believing what we believe?
Or is it suicidal? Or is it suicidal? Ultimately, we would lose because we don't have nuclear. The Muslim countries don't have nuclear weapons in the Middle East. America has it all, and Britain, and and so it's just an asymmetry of power that strikes me, despite our rage and our justified anger. But realpolitik, what options are there really on the table for us?
I'm so happy you asked this question, because I think this is such a crucial question, and it's essential that Muslims start thinking like this. Now, I was asked the same question by an Egyptian at a talk I gave at London University a few months ago. And he said to me, what do you expect Egypt to do? He's Egyptian. What do you expect Egypt to do? He goes, if they act, the American base in Qatar will devastate Egypt. He goes, what do you expect us to do? So I asked him the question back, actually, and it completely floored him. I said, okay, I'll ask you a question instead. Israeli forces invade the Sinai. What should Egypt do? He waited, and then he was compelled to answer it the way he had to answer it. Egypt should defend itself.
Yeah, of course.
So it's very interesting. So because of a line in the sand that has been drawn between Gaza and the Sinai, which separates brother from brother, Muslim from brother, Muslim from Muslim, you're willing to sacrifice the Egyptian soldiers and accept any consequence when it comes to the sovereignty of Egypt. But you will not move your soldiers to defend those people in Gaza that are being genocided right now in front of your eyes.
But to defend them how? I mean, I'm not. I don't know if the analogy is exact, but leave that aside because I'm not an expert. But what exactly would you want to do? The Jordanian army, the Lebanon?
You know, when they were starving them and everything on it, if the UAE launched airplanes to drop in food every single day, the U.S. would threaten Israel if they said, you will not shut anything down, because if one of those things falls and you cut off our oil supply, there'll be trouble. That's what I would have done. You know, right there and then. Cut off all ties. They would have cut one airplane would have been shot. It would have been game over for the U.S. Okay, from now on, the U.S., Europe, everybody that the U.S. partners with, it would not reject on it, will get absolutely nothing from OPSEC. That will destroy the U.S. That's called having balls, though. Like King Fire. That's called having balls, though. Yeah, they wouldn't be able to. They'd be like, whoa, like, don't. I'll be flying just airplanes up and down. I'm like, you know, they call it, F around and find out. I'll be like, all right, do it. Shoot one of our planes down. Do it. I mean, do it. All right, let me do it. Do it. I would be like, do it. I beg you to shoot something down. And Israel probably would have done it. Be like, okay, and then cripple all of Europe, the U.S., everything on it. They have enough wealth that they could sustain themselves for a very long time. But like, no, don't worry about it. Hey, let's stop the production on it. Hey, we're gonna go through some hard. I'll be like, hey guys, we're gonna go through some hard times. And the Muslims be like, all right, bad. We're gonna go through some hard times. Don't worry about it. We're good though, because we have all this wealth. We're good on it, and just stop everything. And just we're gonna put sanctions on you and be like, bad. China be like, China, you want oil? Cheap price? We'll give it to you. But China be like, all right, they're not going to mess around with China or Russia. Yep, exactly.
Lebanese army.
So the Egyptian army is extremely powerful, by the way.
No,
yes.
It is. I'm aware that it's the Egyptians. Absolutely.
In terms of Air Force, it matches the Israeli Air Force, for example, just to give you...
Is the idea then that these various countries would simply combine and go in and liberate Palestine by physically going in there?
I'll give you a few examples that I think is really important when we're looking at this issue, because there's a myth that the Zionist entity is almost invincible.
Yeah.
And the reason that myth has existed is because no one's really put up a fight against it. As I mentioned, in 1948, what you really had was a situation where the Arab regimes at that time were in cahoots with the British and actually the Zionists. They never intended to liberate Palestine. So the example of Omar Ali Baghdad breaking the chain of command was a unique example. The example of General Jazi in 1968 breaking the chain of command was another unique example. But generally speaking, these regimes are working with the Zionist occupation. So we've never really had a situation where we thought it's been a fair fight. It's a situation where we've always been told the Zionists are invincible, you'll never be able to defeat them. But actually, when we have fought them a few times, they haven't been
Afghanistan defeated the US with
the best example in
sandals.
its own right. So after 16 months of genocide, when the ceasefire was kind of agreed, the resistance in Gaza was still standing. It hadn't been destroyed. I mean, there's one public announcement by the Israeli forces that they suffered 21,000 casualties. That's 6,000 deaths and 15,000 wounded against essentially a rebel force. That doesn't look at the strategic positions that we have. So Palestine is only Israel, occupied Palestine. There's only three major cities. So it's Haifa, Tel Aviv, and Jerusalem. It's a tiny country.
It's not, as I say, if Israel seems the 51st state of America, we're dealing here, can Egypt and Jordan and Lebanon go to war with the United States? That's what I'm really asking here.
Yeah, I think under our current regime, under our current regime, don't expect anything.
And with Britain and Germany and France and NATO, can it go to war with the world's greatest military alliance in history? and succeed
Yeah.
and beat them. That's kind of how it seems to be. It's not really to do with Israel. Israel is propped up militarily,
By America.
financially by America and Germany and Britain to some extent. But
Yeah.
if you look at the real powerhouse, it's NATO/United States. Can the Muslim world take on that and win? Is my question really. I'm not convinced.
I think it's an important question. It is an important question, but I don't think we can just look at it purely militarily. So there's strategic advantages. So we know that the oil flows through most of the Muslim world. We're not just looking at the power of Egypt as a military, Turkey as a military. What about Saudi and the Gulf states in terms of what they possess in terms of wealth and resources? The fact that we do have a nuclear power that is in striking distance of Israel. So nuclear power, nuclear capability doesn't become Pakistan. So I think we have to look at all the advantages that we have. I agree with you. It's unlikely that you're just going to face Israel alone. But having said that, public opinion has never been weaker for Israel in the United States as it is now. So that's part of the narrative that we're winning. And that's part of the narrative that we have to continue making, that why are you devoting so much of your resources and potentially soldiers and people that will die for a cause that we don't believe in? So I think we have to look at all our, options available to us, both strategic, diplomatic, economic, and militarily. They haven't even, like when we talk about Jordan. So for example, one of the things that Jordan does have above Israel, which is not in terms of its huge military, but it's still not a tiny military. It's 150,000 soldiers, well-trained soldiers. It has high ground. So Jordan actually can overlook the whole of Palestine. I don't know if you saw that clip where Trump put a pen on a desk and he goes, Israel's like this pen on my desk. It's too small. He says what people don't say openly. He's the kind of guy, he says it out loud when you shouldn't. But he's realized, hang on, you can't defend Palestine. It's actually not possible to defend it. It's too small. It's actually too small. So from the widest point of Palestine to the whole width of Palestine, it takes 2 minutes for a fighter jet to fly over it. 2 minutes. So it's not a land that you can defend. So, but that's because you have the cooperation of Egypt, Turkey, Jordan, all the Khalid countries who will ensure that it does not get threatened. The reality is we have to look at all the options available to us and not just the military ones. But if you think about the Yemenis just being able to block the Red Sea route, what about if you block the Mediterranean? Well, Israel's completely cut off then. But we haven't looked at any of those options because there's no intention to do that. That's the key point. So I think we need to take even one step back. I know what I'm saying isn't going to happen based on the current situation that we're in, because we're not being ruled by people who have any sincerity.
Exactly.
But the people need to imagine a situation which is not the same as it is now. Because if we continue on this path, what are we waiting for? Not only Palestine to fall, but it will be Jordan tomorrow and Lebanon and Syria and everywhere else. So there was a very, very interesting clip that went around a few days ago from a Jordanian retired officer. And he goes, you know what? I'm going to stop with the diplomacy. I don't even want to talk about diplomacy anymore. Do we not have any shame as a people to do anything within our means to stop this genocide? And I think we do need to believe that we can take all the measures within our control. Like anything in Islam, you're only obliged to do what's in your control. So there's an ayah in the Quran, وَعِدُّ لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, and prepare for them what you can. But what you can. I mean, it doesn't mean we have all the means available, but certainly we're not even working in that direction to think of a situation where Israel and its crimes can be challenged. And I think that's important for people to start discussing. And scholars need to discuss that, and imams and thinkers and journalists and the military. Because if we're going to continue on this path, there's nothing left for us in the Middle East. Palestine is being wiped out, and tomorrow it will be the other countries because they believe in a greater Israel. It's not even something they've hidden. They've not hidden about their intentions. And we have to believe that victory does not come from us and our preparations. We know that from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, the examples of Badr and the example of Khandaq, the Battle of the Trench, they were prepared as best as they could, but they put their trust in Allah when they took those decisions. We can't continue in this path of complete abject failure. We really can't.
Yeah. Well said.
And I want to move on to what is really important and something that we neglect to do, which is we look at Palestine from the lens again of a national cause. But actually, Palestine is part of the Ummah, and its causes are one with the Ummah. We have occupation that's existed in Kashmir for as long, since 1947, by the most densely kind of position, the highest density of military soldiers anywhere in the world is in Kashmir, way over 500,000 soldiers. You have Sudan, which is still reeling from the civil war, which started exactly 2 years ago, yesterday, on the 24th of Ramadan in 2023, where half the population has been displaced, half the population is at risk of famine. Some estimates put 150,000 people as the number killed because of the RSF militias that have, kind of initiated this attack against the Sudanese army and the people. You have the Yurgas in East Turkestan, who are under their own slow genocide, where they're being forced into concentration camps, where they can't fast, where women are forcibly married off to Han Chinese men. We have the genocide in Burma, in Rakhine state, of the Rohingyas, where at least 20,000 people have been killed. And actually, just a couple of days ago, a boat trying to escape the persecution from Burma was capsized off the coast of Bangladesh, and people died there. This is the reality that we're facing. And I think we really do need to understand our cause as Muslims should never be nationalistic. We need to elevate that discussion. And we need to remember the people who have suffered so much across the world. It can't just be Palestinian cause or Syrian cause or Lebanese cause or Yemeni cause or Kashmiri cause. We're all one ummah. And I think it's very important we continue amplifying that.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I put together a couple of months ago in a talk.
Very striking image.
Yeah. And it's actually based on a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says about asabiyya. And asabiyya is like it captures all the different types of division, be it based on racism or tribalism. And he says in the hadith that nationalism or asabiyya, it's rotten. It's rotten. And the reality is, look how rotten it is, that it's caused so much division. And actually, even when we think about it on a very local level in the UK, I always think it's quite interesting how there's never been more anti-discrimination laws. There's never been more anti-racism laws, but there's never been more hate crimes than ever. So it's like the more laws that are passed, the more crimes still continue. The crimes even, there's an increase in the crimes. Why is that the case? Because ultimately it's a mindset issue, and you have to change your mindset. And Islam came to change the mindset before it came to change the rules. The rules follow the concepts or the outlook on life. Mm-hmm. So when you think of Islam, how it values people of all colors or backgrounds, it came to remove this concept, actually, that people should be nationalistic and actually dominate one another because of their own interests in terms of the people or businesses, whatever it might be. And that's what we see in the world now, capitalism. The Americans wanting to dominate the world and Europeans wanting their share. And what's happened is the people are the ones who are left to suffer the consequences. Islam has a much more beautiful and a much more fair system that came to actually eradicate this way of thinking. And I wanted to finish off on a very personal story. And this is a story that I heard actually only a couple of years ago in Jordan. I visited my cousin, and he was telling me the story of my uncle who passed away with cancer a few years ago. And he said that on his deathbed, he said to my cousin Saeed, he goes, call my brother Fuad. Fuad is my father. He goes, call my brother Fuad.
Oh, it's okay.
We need to go and wash the horses in Kasaria.
Oh, no.
And he said to him, what horses, what Kasaria, what are you talking about, essentially? Mm. And then he asked my father the story after he passed away, because he wasn't able to explain it. He was in his final throes of death, and he passed away. And he said to him, when we were young children, we used to accompany our father, and we used to wash the horses in Kasaria, which is about 10 miles, maybe less than 10 miles from where they lived in Khanir. Mm. And it just made me think that when people talk about Gaza, people can just give up their land. What's the big deal? It's not that significant. They can just move to somewhere else. But this is the memories that go with you. For a man that lived, whatever it was, 70 odd years, but he remembered the story of washing the horses in Kasaria. And this is what kind of moved him at that time as he was approaching his death and meeting his creator. And I just think it's so important to remember when we look at the people of Gaza. Some people ask me, why didn't they just give up? Why didn't they just give up their land? But actually, they believe in the cause. They believe in the cause that Islam gave them. They believe in...
we never gave up our land in Puerto Rico. We fought tooth and nail to the very end until we were taken over by the West. But yeah, for me, it's like it's like no, it's our land. Why didn't give it up? This is our land. I die, me or creator. Like that should be the. It's not the mentality we should all have. Muslims, all right. Well, guess what? Guess we're gonna die here. I guess I'm going to heaven. Cool. Anybody got a stick and a rock? Because I'm about to meet Allah. You know what I mean? Puerto Rico, that's it. We were terrorists. The island of Puerto Rico was terrorists. We would have been called terrorists. If this was being back in the day, we would have been called terrorists. Straight up. So when I see that, I'm like, I know exactly what I mean. It's in our blood. In Puerto Rican, it's in our blood. I'm like, we were terrorists. Like, all right, cool. I'm like, that's why I speak the way it is. It's like it's in my blood. It's like, I mean, hey, I guess I'm meeting my maker. That's just my way of thinking. I don't know why I know everybody's like, oh, but it's hard. Like it's like that's all that's cowardly talk. I don't believe in that. That's why. Sorry, it's just never. It's not in me. It's not in me. It's not in me. You know, and we've always been people of faith. You know, so yeah, the worst that could happen is that I go to heaven. Really. Yeah.
The sacrifices that they're making. And I think we need to be the ones who sacrifice with them and not just cheering them from the sidelines. I think that's a very important message to your listeners, that we have a role to play and we shouldn't kind of underplay that role.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's very, very moving indeed. Thank you very much for that. And I do recommend, if you want to read more about this, the book by Professor Alain Pape. He's actually an Israeli historian living in Britain now, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And it says on the back, the 1948 Israeli War of Independence, as they call it, involved one of the largest forced migrations in modern history. Around 1 million people were expelled from their homes at gunpoint. Civilians were massacred and hundreds of Palestinian villages destroyed. Denied for almost 6 decades, it had happened. Had it happened today, it could only have been called ethnic cleansing. And of course, it is happening today. So this was written obviously before the latest installment of that. And this is based on meticulously researched, using a lot of archival documents to dig out. So this is all very, using primary source materials. He's a professor of history, he's an historian, meticulously researched about the Nakba and why we need to remember it, because it's still ongoing. It's not just historical fact, it's historical present as well, very, very sadly. And we're all accomplices in the West now for enabling this from day to day. But
well, that was the video. Oops, okay, there we go. Oh, man. Yeah. And he said it best. Read the Quran. Every time you feel like, oh, but the U.S. has nuclear bombs, we have a law. I mean, that's it. We have a law. And if Allah does not will for a bomb to drop, it won't. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. Like even when we say we're people of faith, we forget that we're people of faith. Like it's like we're brainwashed to this thinking, oh, but they're a superpower. Allah is the superpower. Like literally, Allah is the only superpower. There is no other super. It's Allah. That's it. Like that's all there is. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. That's what we're supposed to live by. So maybe I'm not afraid anymore. Maybe I just, I'm like, even when I think about it, I'm like, okay, my kids, if I die, my kids will, they'll mourn me. Get it? And inshallah, I'll see them one day. People of God have shown us what real faith is. That's it. That's it. They said Allah doesn't give us more than we can handle. That means He knows the people of Gaza could handle this. So it means that in the rest of the entire Ummah, Allah knows they're so weak that they cannot go through that test, and only the people of Gaza can do it. And it has exposed the entire Ummah. That's what it is. Weak, feeble, completely. The entire Ummah just exposed. All the supposedly Muslim leaders exposed them. Exposed them all as trash, not Muslims at all. It just showed us right on our faces. So. And and yeah, even though my channel doesn't get any views anymore on it, my likes for nothing on it, you know what? I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm going to continue to, do my part. That's all I can do. That's all I have the power for it. I'm not afraid to do it. I'm not afraid to do it. Guys, it's midnight. This is a good stream. Of course, everything that comes from Brother Paul is amazing. Amazing. It's always amazing. And we got to keep praying for the Ummah. We have to keep praying for the Ummah. Praying is, in fact, our superpower. It is the superpower because we're talking to the ruler of all. Alhamdulillah. Tomorrow, I'm not sure tomorrow. There's some other videos to put in there as well. So, I was also thinking about doing like an earlier one by 11 o'clock my time. It'll be like 12 hours behind. So maybe I'll do 2 tomorrow. That's what I'm thinking. And yeah, the day of judgment is going to be the day. And you know what? The Ummah is going to be called out so badly. It's ridiculous. And I truly now, it's like I understand. The Quran is this is a year where it's like the Quran's just like right in my face. Like, whoa. And it says, why the Quran says that the Muslims will be the first ones to taste the hellfire. Boy. Left and right. Left and right. Left and right. They'll be their own little. It's like, oh, just keep going, just right there to the fire. Just keep going. But I'm a Muslim. Yeah, you keep going. Yep, just keep going. Yeah, no, I gotta do a gaming stream. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe I'll do it early. Maybe we'll do a gaming stream at 11 a.m. my time, and then I'll do something more. So, yeah, Allah said it. So, may Allah have mercy on us. May Allah have mercy on us, alhamdulillah, because we need Allah's mercy. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. Alhamdulillah. Allah bless you guys. Keep praying. And then, yeah, I'll do 2 streams tomorrow. I don't have my girls tomorrow, so I know I have to do like a doctor's appointment. After that, I'm free, so alhamdulillah. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share my videos wherever you can. Do whatever you can. Find them informative. Hit a like on them. Comment. All that good stuff that I have to say. I'm also on Rumble. The Rican Muslim Show is on Rumble. Alhamdulillah. So until next time, guys. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And may Allah have mercy on us. Alhamdulillah. Peace.